I want to talk about an incredible book that just hit our radar. Aeromasters celebrating a century of the American fighter pilot. This isn't just a book, it's a visual masterpiece. It features over 2 years of original research, incredible stories of bravery, and jaw-dropping aerial photography. It's the perfect addition to any home and a spectacular gift for the history or aviation fan in your life. Don't miss out on this limited edition commemorative book. Do yourself a favor, open up your podcast app right now and click the direct link in our show notes to order your copy of Aeromasters. It truly honors the American hero. Imagine standing deep in the untamed wilderness of the Ohio frontier. The year is 1755. You're surrounded by a suffocating green canopy, trapped in a chaotic crossfire as French troops and native warriors ambush your regiment. British regulars are panicking, officers are falling all around you, and the air is thick with smoke and screams. Through the haze, you see a towering 23-year-old colonial stride into the center of the madness. He has just risen from a sickbed, yet he rides directly into the gunfire. Bullets shred his coat, 2 horses are shot out from under him, but somehow he remains untouched. To the warriors watching through the trees, he appears to be protected by an unseen force. This isn't the stoic, gray-haired man on the dollar bill. This is a young, ambitious, and deeply flawed soldier learning how to survive. This is George Washington before he ever imagined a revolution. Welcome to Talk with History. One filmmaker, one historian, leading history-inspired world travels for the curious, the history lovers, and the explorer in us all. I'm your host, Scott, here with my wife and historian, Jenn.
Hello.
Today we are swapping out our field gear for some movie popcorn, because we just watched the new epic historical drama, Young Washington, directed by Josh Irwin. This film focuses entirely on Washington's brutal early experience during the French and Indian War, from his humbling defeat at Fort Necessity to the bloody chaos of the Braddock Expedition. I'm Scott Bennie, and today we are reviewing the origin story of America's first Commander-in-Chief. All right, Jenn. It's been a busy summer for us.
Very busy summer, and we are getting it all in.
We're making it happen. We're making it happen. We've got our Route 66 trip coming up. We may or may not be able to have content all the way through that. We're giving it a shot. We'll let you guys know if there's going to be a week or two where we may kind of throw some rewind episodes in there. But today, we are talking about Young Washington. You guys have probably, if you're listening to this, you've probably either seen the movie or seen the ad, seen the trailer. Spoiler alert, I enjoyed it. I was pleasantly surprised.
I was happy we saw it on July 3rd.
Because the day, I think it was the day it came out.
Yes, and I think because that's the anniversary of Fort Necessity, too. So I was happy to see it on that anniversary. I did not like your intro because you said Ohio wilderness.
I was like, did I say something wrong?
It's Ohio Valley because everything takes place in present-day Pennsylvania.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, interesting.
So Ohio doesn't get to claim any of that. The Ohio Valley.
Don't they even in the movie? Don't they even describe it as
the Ohio Valley?
They keep referring to it as like the wilderness is like the Ohio Valley, the Ohio wilderness, who's the rich guy that owns the 5 million acres or
Fairfax.
something like that? Fairfax. Mm-hmm. So, for those listening, if you haven't seen it yet, obviously there's no real spoilers, right? This is history. This is George Washington. Surprise, he lives through everything, right? But they focus on what people don't, I'd say the general person who doesn't really study history a lot, specifically Washington, probably doesn't know as well. And that is his early start with the British, kind of working his way into becoming an officer with the Virginia militia, and his early failures that really kind of laid the foundation for who he was as a military man.
So there's a couple of things, like exactly what you said. Like there's some things that this is really going to stress and drive home. First, it's going to stress that Washington isn't a gentleman. So they're going to stress that pretty early on when he loses his father, Augustine, in April of 1743.
So is that kind of what happened? Like they made it sound like in the movie, he was getting this education. His father kind of had some status. They had land, his family, and then his father died when he was 11, and he lost a lot of that status. That's what it seemed like in the movie.
Yeah, so that's exactly what happened. So Augustine is married first to Jane, and
Augustine was his father.
Augustine was his father, and he marries Jane when he's 21. Jane's 16, and they have 4 children. And Lawrence Washington is their oldest, and then they have Augustine Jr. So 2 boys.
Yeah, it was Lawrence, the one that was basically his like half brother, because his father had 2 sons from a previous marriage.
Jane, who I'm talking about right now.
Yeah, I mean, so that's the thing is like for the people who know Washington and this history well, it's relatively rote knowledge. For me, this was new. I was trying to kind of put it together with he kept referring to this man in the movie as his brother.
Yes.
And I kind of always he seemed more like his uncle, but that's because he was a brother from a previous marriage and he was much older.
Yeah, brother from another mother.
Yeah.
So Lawrence is 25 when his father dies, when Augustine dies, and George is only 11, like you said. So it is kind of like a pseudo father figure, but you have to understand Augustine is a self-made man, and those boys have been educated in Europe. So they've had formal education.
So he was able to send them over there.
And that's where you get this term gentleman comes from. I hope people understand in the 1700s, when they were referring to a man as a gentleman, think of it almost as saying educated.
And like educated in England.
Yes.
And they actually drove that home. See, again, this was new to me. A lot of this was new to me. They kind of really drove home when Washington's kind of like trying to get his way into these Fairfax rich man parties. They drive home that he is not educated. And he's like, well, he's making the point, like I read all this other stuff, probably more than anybody else. Like, no, not educated in England.
Yeah. No formal education.
Yeah.
And so that's what this is trying to drive home to, that Washington is rallying against these things that have kind of detrimented his career. And he's trying to build, I wouldn't say self-made man, but he's overcoming these obstacles of the time.
It was like the societal structure was so ingrained that you had to do this to be considered that.
Yes.
And they kind of kept referring to colonials as like this weird, dirty word.
Yes.
And it was almost derogatory, and it was almost like, okay, kind of just wild man, right? Farmer.
Yes.
It was almost in that light, even though they're out here with hundreds, if not thousands, right, of acres, and they're taming, everything.
So because he's born in Virginia, he's born in the colony, he's not born in England, that is looked down their nose upon. And he's trying to hold it as something of value and working against the societal understanding that it's not. And it's just like you said, so he's 11 years old when his father dies, and Mary Ball Washington, who is his second wife, George is the oldest boy of the children they have. So in essence, George inherits all of the land that Mary Ball she'll never remarry, and she will manage that land. So Augustine will leave in his will that all of these properties, it's Ferry Farm, 3 lots in Fredericksburg, and 10 enslaved, all inherited by George Washington at 11 years old.
Oh, okay.
But Mary Ball, she's the manager until he comes of age.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what it's showing you there, that she will never remarry, and she really, goes to work, right? She manages the property. And George Washington will always say, the most influential person in my life was my mother. So even though you see this struggle where George is disgruntled that he doesn't get to go to school, that now he has to work the land, and that his mother is not really supportive of his endeavors.
Yeah.
She really realizes that it's not really up to her. And so she tells him what she thinks, and then she also supports him in what he wants to do.
And I think they do a good job. I was reading up a little bit on his mother, right? Mary. And I think they did a good job of the movie of kind of showing like one, like you said, she's, as he got older, once he finally started getting older and of age to try to come into the military. And basically that's what he wanted to do because that's how he knew he could gain status. He was ambitious. He was capable. He was smart, all these things. Right. But she was very frank and said, I don't want you doing that. And he was like, I don't care. I'm going to go do it anyways. Right. And so there was kind of very much this push-pull. And I was reading up on Mary Washington. There's some differing opinions on her and her relationship with Washington. So it's very complicated from just a little bit of research that I was doing, whether it's through state parks that kind of manage her stuff, or I was reading an interesting article on her for Colonial Williamsburg. They kind of wrote this whole very interesting kind of how complicated she was and how interesting her relationship with George Washington was. So like you said, someone like that, because the norm was to get remarried, was to have a man, and she did not do that. That was very outside the norm. So again, something else, and I always understood that George Washington was very sensitive about his mother and his relationship with his mother, right? But he was this man who was principled and educated himself and put himself forth as a gentleman, which something else I read was the British who were there, that for them, that was a breath of fresh air for these colonials.
Yes.
And that's kind of partly how he was able to ingratiate himself into volunteering, which is what we see in the movie.
Yes. So exactly like what you said, Mary Ball will never remarry. She has a big influence on Washington. I think the great part of what his father dying when he's 11 is he's old enough to have seen his father work. Yeah. He's old enough to see how his father manages the plantations. He's old enough to understand it's his property, not his mother's.
And
right?
He's frustrated by that.
Right. So he's old enough to know his place, that even though his mother can give him this advice, ultimately it's George's.
Yeah.
And so Lawrence also sees that. Lawrence, I think, also empathizes with his brother and knowing that he'll never have the education he got. So he helps him to start to read.
And from everything I saw in the movie and what I'm reading, what you're saying, it seems like the movie portrayed it relatively accurately.
I think so. And so Lawrence is, like you said, Washington's foot into the Fairfax family.
Because
Lawrence marries into
Fairfax.
Yes, he marries a Fairfax.
Yeah.
So Lawrence, at 22 years old, he's going to marry Anne at 15, and that is the oldest daughter of William Fairfax. And what happens is Anne kind of gets engrossed in a little scandal where there's a clergyman who takes liberties with her, and she tells her father that this clergyman has basically abused her, and her father's answer is to take that clergyman to court, but they don't win. The case is what is they call
Like thrown out?
Yeah, like thrown out.
Dismissed or whatever.
Dismissed. Yeah, the case is dismissed. But he also wants to marry off his daughter so she's not disgraced. And Lawrence happens to be staying with them as he's building Mount Vernon.
Oh, interesting.
So there's this 22-year-old Royal British officer who coming into Means, and he happens to be there when their oldest daughter, who's 15, has just been disgraced. So William Fairfax marries them off very quickly.
Okay, so that's kind of how George Washington's older half-brother gets into the Fairfax, which is, and again, living in Virginia for a couple of years for us, I never really knew, like, I think we lived in Fairfax County, or Fairfax County was right next to us.
It's huge.
And I didn't realize that, like, it made sense when I'm watching the movie. It's like, oh, Fairfax. Oh, of course. That's why, like, everything in Virginia is Fairfax Avenue or County or whatever.
Yes. So you have to see the Washingtons. That was really a chance of opportunity for Lawrence. And although they're not quite the class of the Fairfaxes, it does save his daughter's reputation. And so William Fairfax always looks at Lawrence very favorably and actually looks at George Washington very favorably. He becomes like a pseudo father to him. So this whole idea of him sneaking into the party, I think, was just to reinforce that he's not an educated gentleman and that the Washingtons are below the Fairfaxes class-wise, but that never would have been a thing.
Okay.
George Washington would have been accepted as the brother of the Fairfax family.
So the patriarch of the Fairfax family actually did kind of know, George long before, kind of, because in the movie he sneaks into the richer party, right? Didn't have his invite, and that's also how they kind of spark up the love interest.
Yes.
So was that pretty accurate as well?
No.
Okay. So, and that's what I'm curious, right? And that's what we're talking about. It's like kind of what they got right and what they got wrong. And typical movie, they'll compress things and they'll add stuff here and there for movie magic. But you're not introduced to Martha.
No.
Because Martha is later.
Later. She's 1758.
Right. So that's kind of after this movie.
This movie ends like 1755.
But you were telling me before we recorded that George Washington did kind of have I don't know if a fling or a flirtatious relationship with
Sally Carey.
With someone. And was she a Fairfax like they said in the movie?
So she marries William Fairfax's grandson.
Okay.
George William Fairfax. But the thing is, George Washington and George William Fairfax were good friends, right? They're about the same age.
So again, not like in the movie.
Not like in the movie. And they hang out together at these parties. And Sally is also kind of a part of their crew, their circle. And so she gets married to him in 1748. And George Washington, this famous scandalous love letter that George Washington writes to Sally happens in 1758 as he's about to marry Martha, and as he's engaged to Martha. And yes, is it pretty loving? And do people believe that he really had a great flirtation with Sally? Absolutely. They believe just like Hamilton flirted with Angelica, right? They believe that she was the debutante of the area. Everybody wanted her. She loved the attention. And George gave her attention like all the other men were giving her.
So that was like the 1700s version of like liking someone's post. Yes. Writing them a letter.
Heavy flirtation.
Yeah.
They do not believe they crossed any moral boundaries. So the kiss.
Yeah, so that never happened.
Yeah. They don't believe that ever happened. And honestly, George William and George Washington and Sally and Martha were great friends.
Okay.
They visited Mount Vernon many times and hung out together as a foursome. So yeah, it wasn't like this.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's and again, I didn't know.
But it's good for the movie.
Yeah, it was great for the movie, and it helped drive some of the plot line because it showed that he did have some sort of relationship, right? But it was pre-Martha, so the whole time you're kind of thinking like, oh, when's Martha come into this? Because like I don't know the history, right?
I think it shows him as very romantic and idealistic and a dreamer.
Yeah, and so that's what I think that's what it did, because even at one point, right, she's reading the letters and he comes back and he's visiting her and they're talking under the tree. Typical kind of colonial era movie, right? They're talking under the tree, these two
with a swing.
With a swing. and she kind of says to him like nobody speaks like this. And I think he says, but they think like it or something like that. And so it kind of shows his frame of mind. They're pushing this thought that George Washington is thinking larger than his station.
Yes, and that he dreams larger than his station, that he is a well-read man, that he can quote lines from plays, impress people with his self-taught knowledge. That's kind of what they're alluding to in these moments, which I think they do a very good job of these moments. It's just not how these relationships actually looked. But you can't introduce a ton of characters in a movie. You have to kind of compress. Yeah. We know compressed interaction, and they're going to do this significantly when it comes to some of the battle stuff.
Yeah. So let's talk some of the battles. So is that how he got involved? Was he did go out and volunteer to survey the Ohio Valley, the Ohio frontier, whatever we're going to call it.
Yes.
For William Fairfax.
Yeah, so he becomes his patron, basically. Okay. So William Fairfax basically funds his career.
Yeah, he says, hey, go do this. I'll pay you if you kind of map out all of my millions and millions of acres.
Yeah, so in 1748, he's going to spend a month surveying Fairfax's Shenandoah Valley property. The following year, he's going to get his surveyor license from William and Mary. Even though he doesn't do an apprenticeship, Thomas Fairfax, his cousin, is going to appoint him surveyor of Culpeper County in Washington. And then that is when he's going to become a surveyor and go out and survey the area. I think I'm reading.
That would have been if I think back on it, that would have been a job I would have been like all about.
Oh yeah.
Right? Because how cool is it to be like, I'm going to go out to this area of the frontier that nobody's ever really mapped, and I'm going to map it and explore it, and then I'm going to come back and show everybody that this is what it looks like.
Yes.
That's pretty cool, just from a movie perspective, and they do show that.
Yeah.
And I was even thinking while we were watching it too, was I wonder where, if they just kind of picked less populated spots of Virginia to kind of film it, get some drone shot. It was really neat. They kind of did a good job of showing what that wild frontier would have felt like.
They did a great job of what Uniontown, Pittsburgh area, Erie would have looked like, because this is all in Pennsylvania. He's going to seek a military commission.
Yeah.
And this is also alluding to this great thorn in the side of George Washington, which is also going to push him into revolution. The British Royal Military will never give him a commission, and he will ask for one over and over and over again. And they always say you can do the militia commission, you can do the Virginia militia. And I think if they ever would have given him a British commission, you never would have had the man he became.
Yeah. It was really, it's funny you say that, because that's what I was thinking. They said it straight up, right? The first time he comes and asks for a commission, the guy he's talking to, the British officer, says, "Stop writing me letters," right? Because he's just written him letter after letter after letter.
You can't afford the commission. Yeah. You have to buy a commission.
700 pounds. It was a lot, right? And I was thinking that too. I was like, gosh, if they had ever, they're basically just pushing him away. And if they had ever given him this commission, he probably just would have stayed a British subject the entire time. We wouldn't have had our first president. It's just wild to me.
Yeah. That kind of sets up this whole stage. Like, again, he's not formally educated, so they see him as an outsider. He's born in Virginia. They see him as an outsider. He can't afford a commission in the British military. He wants to be like his brother Lawrence. He really looks up to him. He wants to be like Lawrence. Lawrence has a commission in the British military. They keep refusing him, but they give him something else. They give him the Virginia militia. So he's appointed with a task from Governor Dinwiddie in late 1753. So you have to understand the Ohio Valley and the French are up in Canada. And what is very much the economy of the time is fur.
Yeah.
Right? And so the French are taking this river. They want the river route. They want the river route from Pittsburgh to trade.
So they're taking the river down from Canada.
So they start making forts along from Erie to Pittsburgh to have this, again, trap the beaver and to take these river routes. And so when they hear about a fort being built up by Erie, Pennsylvania, Fort Le Boeuf, and technically they have the land of that area, and they have it in
the British
in a treaty, and they say, this is our land, this is the land on our map, you need to go tell them to leave. They're encroaching on our land.
So they tell Washington, hey, so was it like in the movie where as he was surveying, the Native Americans came to him and basically said, hey, there's French up here, I'm going to show you where they are. And the Native Americans are kind of playing both sides. They know that if they show the British that the French are here, because they don't like the French, they're like, oh yeah, the British are going to take this personally, and they're going to kick the French out. So
the Seneca American Indians have already been massacred by some of the French, and you allude to that. Half King's father is killed by the French, and so again, because the French are coming down into these lands. And, but so he pits the British against the French. Yeah. So he sees the British coming and he's like, oh, I can use them to get back at these people that hurt my family. Yeah. And so that's why he's like, I can show you where they're at. And they're very straightforward showing that in the movie. They do a good job of that. But he makes it to Fort Le Boeuf in December of 1753. I think it's so funny. Like, this is December in Erie, Pennsylvania. So cold. And it's not quite Erie. It's Waterford, PA. And think lake effect snow. Oh my God. Buffalo. So cold. And we have videos from there. That's the only statue you will ever see of George Washington is there in a British uniform, because it is like they said, they give him a commission in the Virginia militia and he makes his own kind of British uniform. Yeah, the red coat and everything. To kind of allude to that, even though the British make military make very clear that you're not one of us. But that statue there at where the location of Fort Le Boeuf was has George Washington depicted in that British uniform. If you ever see that statue, it's the same city where Strong Vincent was born. So we make the whole video from Waterford, PA. And if you ever watch that video, right behind my shoulder is the statue of George Washington. So that's where Fort Le Boeuf was. So you can imagine the French are coming through the lake there, and then the building a fort right there on the lake. So George Washington shows up at 21 years old with a message to all these people in the fort that you have to leave. And they make, I think that's a really great part they do in this, where the commander kind of like,
he basically tells George Washington, he's like, I know they're not taking this serious. I know the British aren't taking this seriously because they're sending you.
Yes.
And George kind of gives him the look of like, what do you mean? And so he goes on to explain, he's like, they're sending you so that if you succeed and you get us to leave, they'll still take all the credit. If you fail, they've essentially have a patsy.
Yes.
Right? So they have someone to blame it on.
They humor him, more or less. They bring him to dinner.
Yeah, the French do.
The French, they have a good time party, and they send the response. Here's my response. And in reality, he stays for 5 days. He is allowed to dine with them in the fort, but he has to make his camp outside their fort in December in the cold. So it's a very clear message the French are giving him. It's like, first of all, we have
we'll
four times the men as you.
Yeah, we'll humor you.
Yes.
But go on and take your message back.
Yes. And here they also bring up something very interesting, that George Washington doesn't speak French. And again, if you are an educated gentleman, it's one of the languages you will learn. So of all the studying George Washington has done, he's never conquered the French language. And so they can talk around him. They can kind of make fun of him. He has to have an interpreter with him. So again, it's also alluding to this idea that he's not quite the status that he wants to be. And he has to kind of work against that handicap that he has. And it's going to be a bigger problem later on.
Yeah. And I think they do a good job of showing that. So he brings the message back.
Dinwiddie is not happy, right? He thought, what can he do, right? He sent this young man up. They're saying no. So he gets him, he makes him give them reconnaissance. We want to know how many people were at the fort. We want to know how many canoes they have. And we want you to deliver this all tomorrow, basically. And George Washington is like, well, I rode all night to get here to give you this response. This is close to Christmas, as you can imagine. So he writes all of this, and he writes that there was over 100 men, 70 canoes. He saw the fort was accessible to the French Creek. He noted the construction, the design of the fort. He noticed they had 8 6-pound cannons, and they were basically building a fort. And so the governor becomes alarmed, and he wants to get to the Three Rivers, kind of where Pittsburgh is today, because that is such a very valuable choke point for trading, before the French can get there. He wants him to go back and basically stop them from moving down the river. Now you have to realize the French have already gotten to Fort Duquesne, and they've already built it.
And I think they show that when George is coming back kind of the second time, right? When he's coming back the second time, they show, oh, they're even closer than we expected. They're only like 5 miles ahead or something. He says something like that.
Yeah. So he gets there and he goes, oh my gosh, I was supposed to stop them. They've already gotten here and built an entire fort. And so what happens then is in May of 1754, he's supposed to go to that fort and tell them to leave. But instead, they come across a small group of 35 soldiers in a little encampment, 35 French soldiers. And it's commanded by Ensign Joseph de Villiers de Jumonville. Did I say that right?
Doesn't matter. It's French.
And they're camped in a rocky ravine, and it's called the Great Meadows. It's in Fayette County. It's very close to Fort Necessity. This is all very close together by car, it's by 5-10 miles by horse but not buggies, horse and wagons like they would have had with their cannons. So they come across these 35 French soldiers. They have the Senecas with them. They have that man half king with them. What they do not find what the movie depicts is the same French officer that they found at Fort Le Boeuf is not now at this location at Jumonville.
Yeah, in the movie, they use the same kind of character who blew him off the first time in the second encounter further down the river, closer to, right?
Yes.
Closer to
Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh.
Fort Duquesne.
So that part, like you said, isn't accurate, but it sets it up in the movie because this is where things start going awry.
And this is where you really start to have to see the youth of George Washington, right? Like, again, he's 21, 22 years old. This happens May 28th, 1754. The Seneca King has 12 natives with him. Washington has a party of about 40 militia. They come across 35 French soldiers in a encampment. They encircle them, and George is going to ask them to leave, and shots ring out. And this is very much today. No one knows who fired first. George will reiterate this a couple times. We don't know who fired first. But what happens is the French fire back, and George can't control the Senecas, and they go down and just massacre everybody. And they scalp people and they tomahawk people, and they make a very big showing of the types of deaths that they're giving these Frenchmen. And one of them is the ensign, Jumonville, which is now known as Jumonville Ravine, if you want to go visit it. And he's the brother of the commander of Fort Duquesne, the French commander. One of the Frenchmen gets away and able to make it to Fort Duquesne and let them know what happened. Yeah. Unprovoked attack from the British, killed your brother. And this is when George will make the fort of necessity, realizing that the Frenchmen from Fort Duquesne are going to come and for revenge.
Yeah. So essentially, they've just kicked off the French and Indian War.
Mm-hmm. And George will survive this. And he will write in his journals that he hears bullets whipping by his head. He escapes without any wounds. And he said, I heard bullets whistle, and believe me, there's something charming in the sound. So he's in the middle of this battle. He sees it happen. He loses control. He loses control of his command. Half King, I would say more or less, is the one who started this war.
Yeah, he's the one who's he's the one manipulating both, really the British into doing what he wants.
And he does this and then just leaves. It's like,
he got what he wanted.
He got what he wanted. He got his revenge, and he's peace out to George. Like, so now George has to deal with this. So in July of 1754, anticipating this counterattack from the French, he does this makeshift fort at what they call Great Meadows. And they allude to it in the movie. It's low ground. It's highly exposed.
Not a wise choice.
It's an old lake bed. So if there's any kind of rain or flooding, it will flood out. And so he builds this small makeshift fort.
And that's Fort Necessity.
Fort Necessity.
Okay.
And on July 1st, 1754, the French and native forces, so you have to imagine the French have some natives on their side of about 1,700, will meet George Washington and his troops, which are reinforced. They do show it in the movie, reinforced by a British militia that comes and helps them.
By actual British, like led by actual British officers, not Virginia militia. There's some actual British, formal officers.
Yes, and they also poke at George Washington that you're really not a British officer and you're not a gentleman, that even though you have command of us, you don't really have command of us.
Now, one thing they said in the movie, and I only want to ask this because it was one of the few humor spots in the movie, was when the British came up to where the additional troops came up to support George Washington at Fort Necessity. They wrote up in the movie, and he asked, "Where's Colonel so-and-so?" I forget his name.
Yep.
They're like, "Oh, he died the other day. He fell off his horse and broke his neck or something like that." He's like, and they're like, "You've now assumed his rank." So George goes from major in the Virginia militia to now colonel. And so did that actually happen? Because in the movie, his friends, his colonial friends kind of, as soon as that happens, one of his friends, they cut to one of his friends, look at him, and he just kind of gives him oh, that's pretty cool. Like the nod, right? His friend's just sitting outside. He's like, man, George is the colonel in less than a year.
Yeah. So that's what they're alluding to, these battlefield promotions.
Did that actually happen?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
100%. This is why George will have full responsibility of this surrender.
So here he is. George is 22.
Yep.
when in 1754. So he's 22. He's a colonel, which is wild because less than a year before he was nothing. He wasn't even a Virginia militia officer.
Yep. So they say you have on July 3rd, 900 French soldiers attack Fort Necessity, and the ensuing battle will end in George Washington's surrender. So just the hopelessness of the situation. They show it a little bit in the movie, The Rain.
Yeah.
George Washington said the rain was so bad on July 3rd when this battle takes place that they couldn't even see each other.
Wow.
And it also shows how it floods out the fort and it gets their gunpowder wet. And that was what it really incapacitated them. Then so they're basically taken over and they surrender. And in that surrender, George Washington has to sign the Treaty of Surrender, and it's all in French. And he doesn't have a great interpreter. Again, not knowing French is his handicap. It says that they assassinated Ensign Jumonville. So they actually went there to assassinate him. He's admitting to that. And so when he signs the surrender, he has to leave some British officers with him. They also allude to that. And then they have to march back to Williamsburg. And so when he comes back to Williamsburg and he shows the surrender, the governor is upset that he admitted to assassinating.
Yeah, he's reading him the riot act, and George Washington keeps saying, "Well, my interpreter," and he's like, "It doesn't matter, right? You signed it."
Yes, and this particular killing of the brother of the leader of Fort Duquesne, this inflames the tension between the British and the French, which will ignite the French and Indian War. So that's what they always say. George Washington was that spark of the French and Indian War because of what he losing control there at
Fort Necessity.
Before that, at losing control at Juniper.
Yeah.
And then answering it with Fort Necessity. Side note, we went to Fort Necessity and did the lines from Hamilton, History Has Its Eyes on You, because that's what George Washington's singing about. And that's when Chris Jackson first contacted us. So it's there for you if you want to see it. Now, in the movie, they burn it to the ground. In reality, they also burned it to the ground. So what you see today when you go to Fort Necessity is the actual location with the recreation.
Yeah.
So super cool.
Yeah. So they show that, and then they show, I think, the next year in 1755, right, when Braddock, right? So they do show that some of that part of the conflict when George Washington really starts to get his reputation, you know. And so did he actually resign his commission like he did in the movie? Because in the movie, he comes back and he's just completely humiliated by this massive failure at Fort Necessity.
So he does try to resign his commission, remember?
Yeah.
And the governor says it would look bad on me because I chose you. So Governor Dwindle, did I say his name right? Dinwiddie. I cannot say that. He says it reflects bad on me if I pick somebody who can't do this job correctly. And so what happens with that is we now know Dinwiddie as starting George Washington's career.
Yeah.
And so he doesn't let him. He lets him basically have a leave of absence.
Oh, because in the movie, they kind of made it look like he resigned, like they had let him resign, and then he came back to ask to be the aide de camp to Braddock.
Yes.
To General Braddock, kind of proves himself. He tells General Braddock is planning on moving a larger force to kick the French out of the Ohio Valley. And Washington comes in and says, "I'm the only one who knows how to get there." And Braddock's like, "It's only going to take us a week." Washington's like, "No, it's going to take you at least a month." And Braddock's like, "What? A month?" And he starts showing him the map. He's like, "This is all single file. Like this country is not like, you know, Great Britain. It's not like England." And so he kind of proves that. And so Braddock's like, "Okay, you're going to be aide de camp, right?" And then he brings him along, and that's why he's riding with Braddock to this kind of the final conflict that they show in the movie.
Yeah, so I think they allude to Washington doesn't want to. He wants to clean up his mistakes.
Yeah.
Right?
He's still ambitious.
And he feels like he has a lot of now experience in the area.
Yeah. Well, in the movie, they kind of, again, show his mother.
Yes.
His mother, he comes home all defeated. He's taken his anger out on a tree. Yeah. He's trying to chop down a tree, and his mother comes and talks to him and kind of like says, if you don't learn from these mistakes, then you failed twice.
Yes.
Right. You failed once at your actual failure, and you failed a second time by not learning from it and not being better. And so he shows that he's at his low point, and then the movie kind of sends him on the upswing. Yeah.
And so he volunteers as an aide de camp to General Edward Braddock. And we know that George Washington's going to have some tremendous aide de camps for the Revolutionary War. So you can see like how he's learning to do these jobs. Now he's going to recommend split the army into one main column, flying columns. He's going to say there's a difference in fighting within these forests. You can't set up these two columns. There's no fronts. There's no large fields. People fight from the trees. So he's trying to kind of give him like the topography.
It's like the fighting style is different, right? And just think, even if you've never been to England, just think of it. If you've ever seen a movie that's been filmed over there, the countryside is just different.
Yes,
it's just different. And when you think about Pennsylvania and how thick the forests are out there, it's just totally different terrain. And even Braddock was they kind of show how surprised Braddock was when he's like, I've been in, many, many, many battles. He's like, not like here on the new country. And then he gets up there and he's like, why are we stopped? He's like, there's a tree. He's like, and he's yelling at one of his majors or colonels or whatever. He's like, how do you expect to defeat the French if you can't defeat a tree? And it's this massive tree that just fell across the trail, and they got to spend half a day chopping this tree up just to get through.
Because you need the wagons.
Because you have to have all the supplies and all the stuff. And so I thought they did a really good job of showing how hard these conflicts were and how difficult it was to get from one location to the next if you weren't going on the river and all of this stuff. And then so finally we get to this conflict.
Yeah. So they basically. They're being sent to expel the French from Fort Duquesne. So this is, again, we're trying to do the same job now, the third time.
Yeah.
Right. So now we have Braddock. We have a whole British army who's going to do this. And Washington has volunteered as the aide de camp to the general in charge. So they get there. They get to almost in the same area. I mean, they are right beside Fort Necessity when a huge battle takes place. And it's the Battle of the Monongahela, and two-thirds of the British forces become casualties, and Braddock is killed. And that does happen. Now, in the movie, they allude to he's killed right away. In reality, he lingers. He does get a chest wound, and he lingers for a couple days and dies a couple days later.
Okay.
But again, for a movie, they rush where he gives him his sash. That actually does happen.
Yeah, so Washington is basically...
He has dysentery.
He's been sick.
He's very sick.
He gets up. He's riding his horse. He's trying to go kind of save his men because his men, the Virginia militia were on the front line.
Front lines, yep.
And then so he's trying to save his men while at the same time, who is the other major?
So Thomas Gage. And what's so interesting is this is absolutely true. The command of Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Gage. Thomas Gage is going to be the commander-in-chief of the British forces during the American Revolution.
Which is so interesting because it shows these two there's this push-pull relationship between Washington and Gage. Gage is this traditional, formal, has official commission and everything like that, whereas Washington doesn't. But you see Gage kind of coming around to Washington. And at one point, he's even telling Washington, when Washington's sick on his horse, getting ready to go save his men, he's like, Washington, the battle is lost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. He's trying to, he even calls him friend.
Yes.
He's like, come friend. Right. Yeah. And he's like, what could be worth it? And that classic hero shot, right? Washington looks up, he's like, my men. Mm-hmm. Right. And he rides off. And, but so they show this relationship between these two. And Gage, they show him kind of saying, the general called the retreat.
Which didn't happen.
And so Washington's trying to find the general, and he finds General Braddock. Braddock sees Washington. They do a good job of showing him, like, the actor's pretty tall.
Yeah.
Right. And so he was this big, imposing. Yeah. He's kind of reddish hair. And so he finds the general. The general gives him his sash, which you said is accurate.
Sash is at Mount Vernon.
And Braddock basically tells him, rally the men, hold this. He's still giving him direction. He had never called the retreat like Gage had implied.
And Gage makes it sound like this is not my home. My home is across the ocean.
Yeah.
And George Washington's like, this is my home.
Yeah. Well, he said
Right?
that's the difference between us.
That's the difference between us. These men will meet again 20 years later, right?
That's so
As commander-in-chiefs of their opposing forces. I find that, and that's true, right? So I find that very cool how they did that.
Yeah.
So then you see him get the sash from Gage, which will eventually happen. Gage doesn't, the sash from Braddock, which does happen. Braddock will die a couple days later. They do bury Braddock there on the main road. And they did that because they believed the American Indians would desecrate his grave. So they felt like if they put his grave on the main road and trampled over it, that no one would know where it was. Today, there's a big monument there. Again, it's right beside the Juniper location where the massacre took place, and it's right beside Fort Necessity. You can see all of these 3 places within like 10 miles. It's amazing.
So in the movie, he kind of does this heroic bullets can't touch me ride, right? He rides out, he gets to his men, he kind of rallies his Virginia militia. He's able to kind of start maneuvering the troops to turn things around, to turn the tide of that particular battle.
Yep.
And he kind of just saves the day there.
So during the engagement, Washington will have 2 horses shot out from under him. His hat and his coats are pierced with bullets. And he redeems his reputation among his critics for losing command at the Battle Fort Necessity, because he's out there in front, because he helps his men, because he is this marker of inspiration of not getting hit by any bullets and going out in front.
Yeah, well, who is it? Ben Kingsley that plays the governor.
Yes.
So Ben Kingsley, I'm trying to think of other movies that people would know him from. He was in like some of the Gandhi. He was in some of the Iron Man movies, playing that weird actor who kind of pretended.
List.
Yeah, so he's been in a bunch of movies, but he does a great job. So after this, Washington saves the day at Fort Duquesne, right? So they come back, and he saved a bunch of men that probably would have been captured. They come back home, and he's basically kind of giving the report to the governor, who is Ben Kingsley. Mm-hmm. And Ben Kingsley's standing there with some other British officers, and Washington is still, like, he's cleaned up, but he's still in the same uniform. He's like, what's with the uniform? He's like, well, this is the only one that I have. He's like, no. There's bullet holes in it. He's like, well, and Washington didn't understand the question. Mm-hmm. And he keeps kind of hitting him with it. He's like, there's a hole in your hat. There's holes in your uniform. And Washington just kind of looks at him
like it's the only hat I
like
have.
it's this is all I have. And and then they do some things with the Native Americans,
which never happened.
So in the movie, they actually, I guess, some of the opposing Native Americans had said, hey, we want to talk to this guy Washington. So he goes and talks to him, and they kind of say like, oh, you're protected, and they kind of put it over the top as far as the mystery surrounding him.
The myth that does become the reality of George Washington, that he will ride out in front of his troops. He will be one of the first people on the battlefield. He doesn't get hit. He really is an inspiration. This all comes after his life. And so we allude to it now, but they are trying to make it in the movie like they recognize it in the moment, which they really didn't.
Yeah.
Some of the things here too that happen is he comes back and he appoints him commander with the rank of colonel to the Virginia militia. And they allude to why their colors are blue.
Yeah, so it's the new uniform.
Yes. And it's because indigo is a crop that actually is grown in Pennsylvania. It's grown in Louisiana. A lot of people have indigo plantations, and it's a dye that dyes blue. And so it's just an easier color to access. And that's what they allude to. I don't know if that's true, but that's why they wear the blue.
It worked really well for the movie. And so, and then, I mentioned that Ben Kingsley, governor scene is like, hey, you have all these holes and, in your uniform. And then all of a sudden, kind of the last part of the movie, the last scene of the movie is, how is him in the new blue uniform, which you see all the pictures of George Washington, like picture an image of George Washington in his uniform. It's that blue uniform. It's the classic blue uniform. So he's wearing that. And then he's walking in front of his troops, and he gives a speech, and they're like, everybody's like, hey, Virginia, so it's great.
Yeah. And what they don't allude to is like 2 years later, this is again when George Washington, impatient for his official royal commission, and he believes that Braddock would have given him a commission, asks for it again, and he's denied again. It ends in 1755. So this would have happened in 1757. So you're going to start to see, I think they're making a sequel now, more of what's going to reinforce George Washington fighting for independence for our country. I do want to say one more thing. Christopher Gist, they do have him as a character in this. They do kind of show him saving George Washington's life. He's known for saving George Washington's life twice. He goes on missions with him into the wilderness. When they fall into the river as they're heading down to Pittsburgh, it's actually Gist that saves Washington from drowning in the river. And they make it over to the island, and they're able to spend a night on that island. And during the night, it will freeze and they're able to walk over. But Gist does not pass away at Fort Necessity. He actually will live a lot longer, but he's part of the Braddock Expedition in 1755. He's a part of Fort Necessity in 1754. And he actually dies in 1759 of smallpox. So he's not shot at Fort Necessity. And it's not the moment that George Washington realizes his big blunder. But it adds to the movie. So, but Gist does save his life, and they do spend that night on the island in Pittsburgh until it freezes over, and they do walk across the river together. Yeah,
it was great. I actually really enjoyed the movie. Even kids kind of enjoyed it. So if you are a history fan, which I'm sure you are, if you're watching this, if you're listening, we would recommend going to see it. I think they did a pretty good job. And we actually I saw on social media that the guy who wrote the movie says they're filming a follow-up. So they're going to film one around 1776. So that should be pretty cool.
That should be awesome.
It's easy to look back at the giants of American history and see them as statues carved out of marble, perfect, stoic, and destined for greatness. But as we walked out of young Washington, the thing that lingers is the reminder that before the glory, there was the mud. George Washington's story didn't begin with a grand victory. It began with a humiliating defeat, international blunders, and a young man desperately trying to prove himself on a dangerous frontier. He wasn't born a legend. He was forged by his failures. Whether you love the cinematic style of Angel Studios or prefer to stick strictly to primary sources, this film does something critical. It humanizes the father of our country. It reminds us that leadership isn't about never falling down. It's about having the courage to dust off the bullet holes in your coat, get back on your horse, and take the next step. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you.
This has been a Walk with History production. Talk with History is created and hosted by me, Scott Bennie. Episode researched by Jennifer Bennie. Check out the show notes for links and references mentioned in this episode. Talk with History is supported by our community at thehistoryroadtrip.com. Make sure you hit that follow button in that podcast player, and we'll talk to you next time. How many times have you driven past a piece of history without even knowing it? Stop missing out. The History Drive app puts over 500 historic locations right on your screen, revealing the incredible stories hidden just off the highway. Follow our trail with expert-led videos, podcasts, and one-click GPS directions, all for a launch price of just $2.50. Don't just drive, discover. Visit historyordrive.com today.